Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I'm here for my LCK week number 9 overview and analysis video here in the summer split. We are wrapping up the regular season with week number 9 here in the LCK, and obviously we're not just wrapping up the regular season domestically, this is the final regular season video. We've already been doing playoffs for basically every other region on this channel. It's going to be kind of fun to try to get back into the regular season mindset. It's a very different experience reviewing playoff and regular season games, but I'm sure I will make do. Of course, if you want to know my thoughts on the LCK leading into this week, check out the playlist up in the iCard. That's every single week of the LCK done in the same format as what you are getting today, but it might be a tad bit different today because obviously most of the conversation surrounding these teams is going to be directed at what this means for the playoffs, what it means for the teams going forward, and whether or not they're eliminated, or whether or not they're looking for playoff spots. Not everything has been locked in going into this week. There are still 2 playoff spots up for grabs by the end of the week. We will see who ends up grabbing them, but again, check out that playlist if you are interested. But I don't want to waste you guys' time. Let's get right into it. If you are new to the channel, what we are going to be doing in this video is going series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series that we cover, and at the end of the week, I will be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week to tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. I would typically talk about the power rankings that I'm going to update and the standings and all that jazz, yada, 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 but none of that's going to be at the end of this video. No power rankings or anything like that. We are going to be slightly talking about the bracket, but most of that coverage will be saved for tomorrow's video. Tomorrow is going to be my big LCK playoff primer. We're going to go over all 6 teams that ended up qualifying for the playoffs. We're going to talk about my predictions and all of my regular season awards as well. So all of that is going to be in tomorrow's video. That means the end of the video today is mostly just going to be spent talking about the bracket as a whole and which teams I think are in okay spots without going too far in depth on where I think teams might be successful and where they might be not successful in terms of the matchups they ended up drawing. But with all that out of the way, let's get right into the actual analysis here for week number 9. We don't even have the playoff spots locked yet. It is way too early to be talking about that. So let's kick off our week with a relatively important game, a team that is on the borderline here for trying to make it into the playoffs. It's KT Rolster taking on DRX, and KT is going to pick up that 2-0 series win. Pretty important for them to be able to get that here because, like I said, they're one of the 3 teams fighting for those 2 final playoff spots. Moving to 9-8 puts them in a pretty great spot, especially at 21-21. The 500 record is really nice. I think this might actually lock them for playoffs, but I'm not entirely sure. Spoiler alert, I guess, for later on in the video, but this was a really good showcase for KT Rolster. I think that they were really solid in this series. This is kind of the building blocks that they have been building upon for the past couple of weeks, where I think things have just gotten a bit more consistent, not entirely consistent. Again, they're still going to lose series, but most of the time now it's at least against teams that are actually good. This team beat Gen.G for a reason, and so, the upside is there. But player of the series for me is going to go to Beryl in the support position. I've been a bit of a Beryl hater on this channel, and it's not entirely like an unfair claim to give me. I think Beryl is one of those players that has just generally gotten a bad rap because of the way that my grading system works, because I talk about the regular season quite a bit on this channel. Considering it takes up most of the year, it means that the fact that Beryl is usually pretty shit in the regular season and shows up in playoffs and at Worlds and all that stuff, it doesn't get reflected quite as much on the channel because I'm talking about his regular season for most of the year. But ironically enough, I think this might be his best regular season in like the last 3 or so years. Certainly better than last year. 2023 was a really bad year for Beryl in terms of his actual output. Didn't feel like he was locked in or really trying at all. But even 2022, the World Championship year, go watch some of those regular season games. Beryl was running it. That team was 500 for a reason. Like, Beryl and Pioshik just had some games that were like legit unwinnable for the rest of the team. So it's nice to see Beryl actually play well in a pretty pivotal situation. Things are getting a little bit more important as we continue to narrow down the rest of this season. And so for Beryl to step up with the Nico and the Ornn and some more off-meta quote-unquote picks in this game, I think it's really nice to see the Ornn a little bit more understandable. The Nico, definitely an interesting tech that worked out in game number 1. He was really good on that champion. So good for Beryl. I think Pioshik is the other player that you have to shout out. Again, these are the volatile pieces for KT Rolster, and they're probably going to determine how good this team can end up being in the end And with BDD getting back into form, I trust Deft, even though he has been a lot more volatile over the course of this year than basically any other year of his career. Perfect, I think, is a very talented player, but man, can he really struggle in certain matchups. I think Pyosik is such an important piece to bring together for this team. And obviously, he's going into Sponge. It's not the hardest matchup in the world. Sponge has really struggled to make any sort of impact at this level, but Pyosik definitely took advantage of him in terms of what this Sejuani was looking like in both of these games. So Pyosik and Beryl being the two standout members, that's usually a very good sign for KT Rolster. BDD continues this really hot streak that he has been on. He's been one of the best players in the LCK over the past like 3 or 4 weeks. It's been fun to watch, and of course, like I said, deft and perfect. Not always perfect, ironically enough, but usually good enough for this team to do something. This 2-0 was very important, and obviously, I don't think a lot of people expected KT to miss the playoffs, but this puts them in a pretty good position to end up making it in the end. And then for DRX on the other side, this was not a good performance. I think people are, worrying about this team. I'm not really sure why. This is basically the exact version of this team that we've seen most of the year. It's Sponge really struggling in the jungle, getting dud of the series on 2 games of Nocturne, just never being relevant, especially in Game 2 where he truly was horrible. It's Rascal actually looking okay after some horrible weeks. I still think that he's one of the worst players in the LCK. Satap kind of returned back down to earth here. He was very aggressive, but BDD was definitely better on the other side of this matchup, and it's Teddy and Playta just kind of being along for the ride in the bot lane. Like, I continue to see these threads, and I'm going to point it out because people are getting downvoted for this take now, and honestly, they're booing him because he's right. There are a lot of people on Reddit that are like, Teddy is a top 3 AD carry in the LCK, top 4 AD carry. Like, he would be an upgrade over aiming, or he would be an upgrade over deft going into next year. I'm going to make it as plain and simple as I can possibly say it. That's psycho logic. Like, truly, I can't get behind that under any circumstance. Teddy is a good AD carry. He is not a great AD carry. He's like the definition of like a B minus type of AD carry at this level. He is very good at the things that are necessary to play AD carry, and he doesn't really go too far beyond that. He's not someone who breaks the rules of the position and ends up dominating games like a Viper or a Gumayushi at this level, even like an aiming or a deft can do at times. He is like strictly, okay, I'm going to be really slow in the early game, I'm going to be really good in team fights, and I'm going to hope the rest of my team is in a good spot for me to get there. And the reason he's never really been all that successful consistently at the LCK level is because his playstyle relies so much on his teammates actually being good, and they haven't been. And so I don't know, I'm just lower on Teddy. I think he's fine. I think he's like the 5th or 6th, maybe, best AD carry in the region, probably closer to 6th at this point. But, Playta does a lot of hard work in this bot lane as well. Playta's been awesome over the course of this split. He doesn't get the credit he deserves because everybody loves Teddy and he's such a big brand name. But, Playta's been great. I think the bot lane's obviously the strength of DRX. But that being said, this team's not good. They're 3-14 for a reason. Like, we're not expecting them to come out and win this. It's not a shock to see them get destroyed. But congrats to KT. This puts them in a great spot moving forward the rest of the week. If they can get that number 5 seed, that's definitely better than getting the number 3 seed right now in terms of just how things are falling. But, we'll see what ends up happening. This is a very interesting team to track in KT. And then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and another series that's between teams trying to qualify, or at least one team trying to qualify here. It's T1 taking on the Kwangdong Freecs. And T1 picks up the 2-1 series win. Man, did they really need to get this. Not only because they just need to start generating some momentum moving in to the playoffs, but just to give this team some confidence, to know that they can win a game where the enemy team is actually playing okay. The fact that they can come out here and actually beat a KDF team that was showing up and attempting to win. You got the Nidalee Tristana duo for KDF that's kind of been a cheat code for them for most of this year, and they're still not able to win. That's a good sign for T1. Hopefully this is the start of them ramping up for the playoffs, which I think we all just expect them to do because of past performances and obviously because this roster of 5 has made 2 world finals as a unit. But man, it's just really hard to believe in them when they just kind of throw away games sometimes. Game number 1, I mean, I get it's T1. I get this is kind of what they do, is they throw away game 1 and then they win games 2 and 3. It's kind of been their strategy over the past, I don't know, decade. But I still want to see more consistency from them. Thank God they have the break glass in case of emergency Caitlyn on Gumayushi to be able to just win games. Guma is a very easy choice for player of the series here. genuinely, what would this team be without Guma? Like, over the course of this split, he has won so many games for this team, and KIA deserves some credit too. I'm not trying to completely take it away from the support here. I think KIA has been pretty good over the course of this split. Maybe not great, certainly not up to KIA standards, but he's been generally fine, like an upper tier, maybe not top tier, but an upper tier support at the LCK level. But Gumayushi, like, this is maybe one of the more dominant splits he's had in his career. He's typically kind of been the odd man out in terms of resources on T1, not because he's the bad player or anything like that, but because the role, typically speaking, was for Owner to get some sort of early pressure, for Faker to be their teamfight god, and for Zeus to kind of scale into both roles, and, you know, KIA kind of doing his own thing, being the weird, you know, Caitlyn or Varus support player in the bot lane. And then all of a sudden you've got Gumayushi that just is the low resource kind of team player, if you will, however you want to classify it. And I think he's fallen behind in public perception because of that. But he's really emerging right now. They're giving him resources. They're asking him to 1v9 in a lot of these games. And yeah, he's able to do that. He's able to actually be really successful in that role. So we'll see if that ends up being something that maintains for him, at least for now. Really happy to be able to see it. He's been the best player on T1 without a question over the course of this split, at least from my perspective, and it's good to see that that continued in this series. Like I said, KIA also very good here for T1, but Zeus, Owner, Faker, they were fine. Owner was good towards the back half of this series. You know, Cuz on his Nidalee has this like undefeated streak going. Glad to see that Owner was able to shut that down, especially in game number 3 where I thought he was just straight up better. We'll talk about Cuz in a second, but Faker, Zeus, they were fine. Faker looked way better off of the Yone. I don't know what the hell was going on in game number 1. I don't know how much time he's put in on Yone as a champion, but getting him back on comfort, even if Azir isn't like the strongest in the meta right now, I think is still much preferred to whatever we were getting in game number 1. So feel pretty good about T1, at least from like a general sense. Again, I just imagine that they're going to power up going into playoffs, and so these kinds of wins aren't entirely shocking to me. But again, I don't want to see you losing game 1 to a team like KDF. That really shouldn't be happening with this roster. So definitely things to clean up, but you just gotta imagine it's gonna happen eventually. And for KDF, they're fine here. Like, I know that this puts them in a really bad spot. I think this actually does qualify KT Rolster for the playoffs. In terms of record, I don't think KDF has the opportunity to pass them at this point with how things are going. Yeah, with KT at 9 wins and KDF at 7, obviously it can't happen, but they still have a chance. I believe they're still in the playoff hunt. We'll have to see what ends up happening later on in the week, but I feel bad for some of the players on this team. I think Bulldog played relatively well here. I think Dudu had moments, Leaper had moments, but Cuz and Ondil I thought were really horrible. And Leaper wasn't good down the stretch of this series either. I definitely want to make that clear. He was just good in game 1 on the Ezreal, but Ondil, I mean, man, he's just so hit or miss. This bot lane in general is just so hit or miss. It's really hard to get an idea of if they're good or not. Leaper has these great games and Ondil has these great games, and then they have these horrible games where I think the feast or famine-ness of it, you'll take it over what you've had for a majority of this year because at least you're getting some good games out of your bot lane, but it's still not great. It's not filling me with a ton of confidence, and then Cuz, I think, really let them down in this series. He was really important towards what KDF wanted to do, and they just couldn't really capitalize on his Nidalee, which has kind of been unbeatable over the course of his career. So definitely a bit of a disappointing showing for KDF. Their backs are really against the wall. Depending on what happens with FearX, this could already be over for them. Their season could be done. They could be out of the playoffs, which would definitely be a bit of a sour note to end on, but it's T1. Did you really expect them to come out here and win it? Probably not. T1 was definitely the better team, and they proved that here. And then moving on to day number 2 here. And again, we're keeping this streak alive. Teams that are on the bubble really fighting for their lives at the moment. As we saw FearX taking on Hanwha Life Esports. And HLE is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. This kind of was a domination. This was a couple of players looking real good for Hanwha Life. Again, no real surprise here. HLE is one of the best teams in the world at the current moment. Right now, it feels like there is kind of a top 4 or 5, depending on how good you think T1 is. I think, obviously, over in the LPL, I think Billy and Top Esports have kind of emerged as the 2 best teams in that region. And then here, it's clearly Gen.G, Hanwha Life. And then if you want to make it a top 5 with T1, I think that that is totally valid. If you think T1's going to bounce back, perhaps they could be, pretty high in terms of those standings. But Hanwha Life has more than earned one of their spots as one of the scariest teams in the world. And so you got to feel good about the way that this is going for them. They've got an MVP candidate in Peanut and somebody who has really run a lot of this league, a lot more than people are giving him credit for. And you've got some players that are stepping stepping up in other areas. Player of the series here is going to go to Zeka. He's kind of gone under the radar a bit. Kind of funny for me in particular because, you know, he's such a channel darling of the Super K-Man Rocks channel. It's funny when he goes under the radar because I'm just so high on him, but he'll have games like this on Zeri and Corki. People like to make fun of Zeka's Corki. It's still pretty freaking good. Like, I understand the idea that maybe his Corki isn't quite as good as his Akali, and that's probably fair. His Akali is probably a bit better in terms of the mechanics, but his Corki is certainly still near the top of the world. It's just maybe not as good as the best Corki. He's not as good as Chovy at Corki, right? Like, you're not asking him to do that, but he can still pull it out and really dominate games like he did here in Game 2. But it's the Zeri game in Game 1 that I think he's getting a lot of recognition for, and I think he deserves it. I mean, he goes deathless 13-0-13 in these 2 games. He looks awesome. And again, he's kind of been the one to sacrifice a lot of resources over the course of this year. That's not a negative at all. He is kind of faded into the background, and that was a role we were really asking if he was ever going to be able to fill on a top team. Like, if he was ever going to be a guy that could just be a low resource kind of part of the machine, if you will, in metas where it's not necessarily advantageous to play through the middle of the map. That's kind of exactly what he's become here for HLE. Ironically enough, in a meta where it's really important to play through the middle of the map, but I digress. Peanut has looked a lot better because of it. Got to play things like Ivern in this series. I think that's a lot more comfortable for Peanut. Of course, he's still good on Zyra and Brand and a lot of these AP junglers, but obviously as things get a bit more important, I think he's going to want to default to things like Ivern and Sejuani and Maokai that have really given him success over the course of his career. Viper was really good here, but it was Delight in the bot lane that really stood out for me. Delight had a really kind of up and down start to the split. When you look at like the first 4 or 5 weeks, there were some games where it just wasn't really clicking for me when it came to Delight's individual plays, and I called that out on the channel. But I would say over the past month or so, he's really been back in form. It's kind of been him and BDD that have really felt like they've kind of reignited themselves over the second half here, and that's really good to see. Delight is super important towards how this team works if they want to be like an actual LCK title contender, if they want to try to compete with a team like Gen.G. You know, Delight's very important for that. Doran is really good against top laners. He is just better than. That's always been the case, but Zeka kind of standing out to me. Hopefully this means that they actually do have that like 3-headed beast that we thought they were getting with this lineup that kind of showed itself in this series. And then for Fox on the other side, this is not an ideal time to lose because obviously things are not locked in at all right now. It's them and KDF fighting it out for that 6th and final playoff spot. KDF losing on day number 1. Obviously Fox losing here on day 2. It doesn't get easier for you in terms of schedule. So you gotta lock in. You gotta lock in at some point, and this was just not the kind of performance that I think gave you a lot of confidence that that was going to happen in the upcoming series. Dead of the series for me is going to go to Henna in the bot lane. I think you could give this to either Henna or Duro. I thought both were awful. Delight took complete advantage of them on the Poppy in game number 2. In particular, the Smolder was really strong. It was just able to kind of blow them up as games continued to go along. Not that they were any less of a problem, you know, or any less destroyable for Zeri or Corki coming out of the mid lane either. This was just not a good game for the FearX bot lane that I actually think has been pretty okay over the course of this split. Henna has gotten way better ever since leaving Bro. Delight knows a thing or two about that. And then Duro, I think, has been a massive addition. To me, he is the reason this team is in the playoff race. I think he's been their best player since he got since he got inserted into the roster a couple of weeks ago. But it's not like the rest of this team played better. Raptor got completely out-jungled in both games, was never really able to accomplish anything. Clear got beat by Doran. Closer, of course, got beat by Zeka. Like, there really just wasn't a lot of positives to take away from this for FearX. It's a pretty bad time for things to start going wrong for this team, but you have to hope that it won't matter. If KDF ends up losing later on in the week anyways, it doesn't really matter. That FearX has a pretty difficult schedule to end their year, but certainly not a great way to give them momentum depending on what happens with the result. But for HLE, great win. I mean, you're the second best team in the LCK. You have a chance to prove that you're maybe more than that moving into the rest of the regular season. The closeout here is definitely going to be interesting, but at least for now, you're pretty much guaranteed you're at least going to be considered one of the top 2. And then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and this one a little bit less consequential than maybe the ones that we've seen before. It's OK BRION taking on Dplus KIA. And DK is going to pick up the 2-0 series win as per usual. It is a 2-0, and it's not even close. Don't worry about it. Don't look at the fact that game 1 took 43 minutes to close. Don't look at any of that. It was never close. Don't worry. DK is such a funny team to try to analyze because they have so much good going for them, and oftentimes there is a lot to talk about in a positive light for the team, but they always have to mire it with something that is just weird or off or inconsistent, and it's very hard to get a read on whether or not they're they're actually good or if they're just going to flop in the playoffs when their actual problems start to get exposed a bit more. They still do a lot of things really right, and we'll talk about that, but they put themselves in situations where they have to make hero plays, and you don't have to do that. You can be one of the better teams in the world without having to come back from massive deficits or without having to steal Barons or secure smites or anything like that. You don't have to do any of those things, and I'm sure DK will learn that eventually. Player of the series is going to go to Showmaker. This one was not hard. He absolutely dominated both of the back ends of these games. The LeBlanc in game number 1 was game winning in terms of what he was able to do on it, but the Zeri in game 2 I think is what he's going to get a lot of attention for. Just a great series overall for Showmaker. He continues to be both the engine that moves the train and also at times the spinning wheel in the back that ends up keeping it from going full speed. Very weird metaphor, but I hope you guys understood what I was trying to say. He will be so good for this team during certain series, and then there are other series where he's just not good enough to be able to carry it. Honestly, it's very funny to compare these two players, but they play very similarly right now. Showmaker kind of is like Rookie over in the LPL. If you guys have been following the LPL Rookie on Ninjas in Pajamas, I think Showmaker is in a very similar situation here on Dplus KIA. I will say DK is a better team than Ninjas in Pajamas, and I think that is abundantly clear, but it's just funny how they've both kind of grown into this role of being the #1 option on a team that just refuses to try to play through anyone else, even with players like Aiming and Lucid having really good splits so far. Even Kingen, I think, has been really good over the course of this split so far. There are a lot of positives elsewhere on DK, and they always want to feed Showmaker. When it works, it looks really good, like it did here, though. Aiming continues to be awesome. This guy's KDA is out of this world. It's by far the best in the LCK. It's genuinely absurd how good he has been in terms of his positioning and just his lack of bad plays, which is really all I ask out of that position. He's also been making a lot of bigger plays, though. I think generally the idea of Aiming has continued on from what he was on KT Rolster the past couple of years, where his early games are still up and down. They're a little bit slow for my taste, but he is such a good late game team fighter, and he gets so aggressive in the back half of the game that it is kind of worth it, especially when you're going to pull out something like Samira in game number 2, and you're just going to win anyways. So really good stuff there. Moham still continues to baffle me for being in. We're seeing a lot of the problems that we saw when they put Bible into the team last split, when they took Kellen out, where it's just like, okay, well, you've got a player in who's probably a bit better in terms of the mechanical, like 2v2 down in the bot lane, but this team is a lot more discoordinated in the macro sense, and also their vision game has gotten infinitely worse. Kellen is one of the most dedicated vision specialists, I would say, in the world. He's right up there with Kale and Beryl as players that I would say are just like, right, like the vision guys. Moham is just not that. Like, he is not the kind of player that is going to be securing map pressure as much as someone like Kellen is. He's going to be a lot more focused on trying to make sure his AD carry in particular is in good spots. Again, maybe that's the direction they want to go in. I don't think it makes this team better. I think they have been worse ever since subbing Moham in, but what do I know? Lucid can't miss a smite. This guy is actually unreal in terms of objective controlling, and it was really big in this series. Kingen looked okay on the Gangplank. Don't love the pick in general. I don't think he's in a great spot, but you know, it's Kingen. I'll allow it. So DK looking okay, but it's Bro. I mean, you should be able to beat them, and for Bro, like, okay, like, you got destroyed here, but at least you showed some signs of life. I think the top side of this map at least showed something. You had Morgan, who was obviously playing super aggressive, mostly on the Gnar in game number 1. You have to take the good with the bad when it comes to someone like Morgan, because you are going to get quite a lot of bad in terms of the aggressive engages that just don't land, but the ones that do look really good, and he was able to get a lot of gold in this series. Gen.G I thought was also pretty fine, at least in terms of the actual combat parts of Lilia and Viego. I think obviously the objective control was not ideal, and the macro in general for Bro is just an absolute disaster, but Gen.G is a player that is going to be interesting. He's not on this org going into next year, of course. He was loaned in by the Kwangdong Freecs. We'll see what they want to do with Cuz going into next year. That could potentially be an opportunity for him to get that starting job back on KDF, because I think he's honestly been okay over this split for Bro, considering how bad the circumstance around him has been, but I'm certainly not going to die on that hill. Samver and Polu continue to be one of the worst bot lanes in the LCK, if not just like by far the worst. I think they are pretty clearly by far the worst. The AD carry role has been a disaster, and I've been pretty vocal about how bad Polu has been, but dud of the series is going to go to Fate in the mid lane. He's been like the one player that's come in and actually done anything for this team. I really like the signing because at least gets somebody in the building that knows what they're supposed to be doing on a middle tier team. You really don't have anybody who has any experience there. Morgan obviously has been to Worlds, but it's a very different situation for Morgan right now than it was on HLE a couple of years ago. I think having Fate has been a positive, but sometimes you're just going to go into Showmaker and you're not going to be as good as him, and you just kind of have to live with that. Both games of Corki weren't ideal for him, but it's Bro. It's not really all that much. They've been eliminated for weeks. This team moved to 8-31 in terms of game score. They're 2-15 in terms of series score. This is not a good team, and this is not a surprising loss, but again, I just want to see DK clean some things up. I know that they want to play through Showmaker and that they want to make him the star, but I sometimes get concerned that that is their only win condition, or at least the only one they feel comfortable playing towards. I want to see them go towards players like Aiming and Lucid, who are playing well at the moment, ideally with Kellen in the lineup, but at least for now, if this is what they're going to go with, it's probably going to be fine for me. And then moving on now to our middle day here, day number 3, and this is a big determiner for the playoffs here. This series matters quite a bit. It's the Kwangdong Freecs taking on DRX, and in a bit of an upset, DRX is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. This is disaster for KDF. Not only is this obviously not a good result in isolation, it's actually even worse than that, because with a final record of 7-11, this team has officially missed the playoffs. They can no longer make it. FearX has 8 wins right now. Even if they were to lose, which they probably will later on in the week, obviously no spoilers, but it's T1. It's not exactly like they're favorites in a series like that. KDF can no longer make the playoffs regardless of what ends up happening to FearX. They actually were in a really good spot going into this week to be that team that ends up sliding in as the number 6 seed. That would have given them the 6 seed twice in the last 2 splits. That would have guaranteed their spot in the regional qualifier. Alas, with this loss, it's impossible for them. Their year is now over. This is the final series that they will be playing in 2024, which is obviously pretty disappointing considering the expectations of this roster. The top side of this team is still very elite on paper, and there is a lot to like, but they could just never figure out any sort of consistency, and DRX definitely took advantage of that in this series, where, quite frankly, they were just better. I mean, they were better across the board, even when you look at game number 2, which was pretty okay by KDF, maybe not the worst or the best game in the entire world. You're still looking at a situation where, like, DRX bounces back very strongly in game 3 and is really able to make things work. The only reason that KDF was kind of in game 3 at all, the fact that it took so long to close, is because the top side of DRX was such a disaster. It really didn't have anything to do with KDF actually playing well, so we'll get into it. Player of the series for me is going to go to Plata in the support position. This has to go to one of the 2 members of the DRX bot lane. I think a lot of people are going to give it to Teddy. I think maybe you could make the argument Teddy was better in game 3, although I think it was very close, but I think Plata was definitely better in game 1, and that's kind of enough to push him over the edge for me. Again, it really should go to either of these 2. It's the bot lane that has been the strength for DRX all year long, even with Teddy being a lot lower on my list than he is on a lot of other people's lists. I'm still recognizing that he is the only part of this team that has actively been able to consistently win at all, or even stay neutral in terms of the 2v2 early. I just don't think we're giving enough credit to Plata, and while I say that, I think a lot of analysts are giving credit to Plata. I think it's really just Reddit and Twitter that seem to not be on board. I've been on board for Plata for a while. You know, back 2021, I was talking about Becca as a player that I was like, okay, keep an eye on this guy. That 2021 DRX team, I mentioned them a lot because they were one of my favorite teams of all time, and so to see a lot of the players that were on that team as rookies kind of find new life in other areas, it's been kind of fun to watch. Bao obviously kind of doing well for himself in EU Masters. We've talked about Quad over in North America. You know, Pioshik is on KT Rolster right now. There are a lot of interesting pieces. I mean, Kingen was on that team. Obviously, he wasn't quite a rookie at that point, but you know, there are a lot of interesting pieces for DRX back in the day that I think have made weird impacts on the league and just generally on the ecosystem as a whole, and Plata is definitely one of them, but he has grown into truly one of the breakout supports, in my opinion, in the LCK. I think there is a non-zero chance this guy is an All-Pro. I haven't checked the All-Pro list just yet. I made mine myself, and I tend to not want to get influenced by the actual LCK one. I'll probably check that out and reference it at the very least in tomorrow's video when I do put that up, but Plata deserves to at the very least be considered for that. But Teddy was very good this split as well. I just think there's way more good AD carries than there are good supports at the LCK level. Honestly, there are 4 or 5 AD carries that are just really solid at this level and that don't really have a lot of question marks about them. You can't really say that about support, and so Teddy ends up being a little bit less I don't know, notable in terms of his own position. He's not an all-pro candidate or anything like that, but he was very good in this series. The Ashe was very solid for this team. Ashe continues to rise in terms of my priority. The results seem to absolutely be there for that champion. Sponge was much better here in this series, and it's just weird. Sponge has these flashes where he's okay and some flashes where he's just disastrous. It's hard to get a read on him. Satab was fine, but Rascal is actually going to get my dud of the series here. He tried his absolute best to lose this one for DRX, and if he had his way, I'm sure they walk out of this with a loss, but luckily for DRX, Rascal does not have his way in this series. He just wasn't very good. This guy is not good at all. I'm sorry, if he has an LCK spot next year, I don't really know what I'm going to do. Like, I can't campaign hard enough for this guy to at least take one split off or, you know, go play in the Challengers League. Like, try to get some confidence back, because it's clear that the situation right now for Rascal is just that he's in his own head and he's constantly making these bad macro plays. We know he's talented enough to be relevant, but I think he needs to rebuild some of that confidence somewhere else that isn't the LCK. Perhaps that's like a lower tier LPL team. Perhaps that's over in Europe or in North America or something like that, although I wouldn't love that for any of those teams. I don't think that would be good for them as a decision or a roster move, but it shouldn't be here. I just don't think he has an LCK spot left going into next year. It's just been a disaster for him. But outside of that, DRX is at the very least interesting. Teddy and Plata absolutely should have roster spots. Plata should be who DRX is looking to build around to get back to the upper section. You know, we'll see what they do with Teddy, but, you know, they've got some interesting pieces on this team. Unfortunately, it's just not going to equate to anything, obviously, in 2024. But for KDF, this is just not the way that you wanted things to end. You obviously weren't feeling perfect about this year going into it. I had this team ranked 7th in January in my preseason predictions. You know, spot on there. Not exactly spot on in terms of DRX being 6th. That didn't exactly land. The rookies didn't step up quite, but KDF is just one of those teams where the strengths are clear. Like, Bulldog, I think, made considerable developments in terms of his consistency over the course of this year. Cuz is a pretty good player, and he had a lot of good games, even if he wasn't particularly consistent. Dudu, maybe he wasn't as good as he was the last 2 years, in my opinion, and I will definitely stand on that, but he certainly wasn't bad. He wasn't the problem for this team. They just have failed, like truly failed to figure out anybody who can play in the bot lane. And, you know, Leaper and Ondel, they have interesting pieces. Leaper had a couple of great series. He destroyed Deft twice. That's always a good sign. Ondel, I think, has had some really good performances over the course of this split, but the bad ones really stand out on the brain. And you just gotta wonder, like, what exactly is the direction for this team moving forward? They're getting someone like Gen.G back on loan next year. That could be a potential starting option for them, but you build around Bulldog and you try to see what you have. I think if you can actually land on someone in the bot lane that turns out to be good next year, this team was like a bot lane away from being a top 5 team in the LCK. And so, you know, KDF definitely has some upside. Unfortunately, it's not going to happen this year. And for DRX, a little too late for them with this win. 4-14, not the worst record of all time to end your season on. You're not the worst team in the LCK, but you're certainly close, and that's really not where they wanted to be. Plata looks really interesting. Teddy's fine enough as a player. I'm interested to see where they go this offseason, but unfortunately for this former world champion organization, this year was just not it for them. And then moving on to our second series of day number 3 here, and we get to see our number 1 team in action for the first time in the final week. It's Nongshim RedForce taking on Gen.G. And Gen.G is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. This is a weird one to try and analyze because it's very fascinating to watch Gen.G play against an opponent that they just do not give an absolute shit about. Like, there is no thoughts in their brain throughout this series, and yet somehow they were able to dominate it regardless. It's really funny because it's these situations where it's like, well, we don't really have to try all that much. We can kind of just outskill them 1v1 or 2v2 in every single matchup and then just play together in the later half of the game. And it's not like they can stop us. We don't need to make any of these big flashy plays. We don't need to really make any macro decisions. Let's just play this like it's solo queue and this will be over in no time. And ironically, that's exactly what happened. Like, truly, this was a solo queue game, or 2 solo queue games where Gen.G was just able to dominate Nongshim. I think there is some concern around that maybe Gen.G's not entirely focused right now, but I imagine they just have their sights set on more important matters. Obviously, they have a much more difficult challenge at the end of the week, and playoffs are coming up. They don't really have a ton to play for. They've already qualified for Worlds. Of course, I'm sure they want to be LCK champions. Once again, I'm sure that's on the plate. It's on the desire list for these players, but everything they're playing with at this point really is house money if the goal is to go and win the world championships. And so, I'm not really worried about this team at all. Player of the series is once again going to go to Paze. I continuously see people talking as if Paze is just this overrated player on a good team that gets a lot of resources and a lot of opportunities. And, there are parts to that I think is true. He does get a lot more opportunities than perhaps other AD carries in similar spots or similar talent levels would. But I don't think Paze is just some guy in the AD carry role. I don't know how you can watch this Gen.G team and not see that they have structured an entire strategy around making sure Paze is in good positions to be able to take over games. This is not something that you just do for some random guy. Canyon is not going to give up his game for some random ADC. Chovy is not going to give up his game for some random ADC. Paze is legit, and right now, I'm not going to spoil anything for tomorrow's video. He's certainly my favorite for the MVP race. Like, he's a front runner at the very least. His teammate Canyon was leading it for a lot of the split for me, but Paze has just been unbelievable. He's been the best player in the LCK over the last half of the split, and there's really no denying it anymore. He was already my summer split MVP last year. I thought he was incredibly underrated in terms of what he was offering Gen.G, and as kind of Ruler's replacement, he has stepped in and been as good as they could have ever asked him to be, basically from moment one. The kid turned 18 this year. He is absolutely decimating competition that he has no business decimating at this point. There is a real conversation that he is a top 5 to 10 player in the world at the current moment, and I just don't know if we're giving him enough credit for that in terms of the public sentiment. Everybody else was still really good here. I'm not trying to say this was a one-man show or anything. It's not like Lehens wasn't setting him up all year long and making it a lot easier for him. Chovy is just always winning in the mid lane. The guy plays the most aggressive Tristana I've ever seen in this series, was truly limit testing, and somehow it still ended up working out. Canyon, Keen, they were all fine here as well. The Skarner pullout from Canyon is very funny, but Gen.G is just one of those teams where they can play at 50% and still just demolish a lot of teams at this level, and that just goes to show you how much further ahead they are than basically everybody else in the LCK. And then for Nongshim on the other side, like, they're just not, they don't have the talent to keep up with Gen.G. Obviously, their season was already over. There's really not a lot for them to play for. They've been eliminated from playoffs, but again, I still continue to find interest in this roster because there are quite a few players that I think are trying to play for jobs next year. Players like Vital in the support position, Fisher in the mid lane, Sylvie in the jungle, even Mihail, I think, is going to get some looks by this Nongshim team to see if they want to continue rolling with some of them going into next year. Unfortunately, it's just not really working out right now. Gen.G maybe not the best barometer to put them up against, though. Dud of the series is going to go to Sylvie. It's so funny. I was just talking about Sponge for DRX, and I think Sponge and Sylvie are pretty similar players. I think obviously Sylvie is a bit more advanced. He was much better this year than Sponge, but Sponge had a very similar year to what Sylvie had last year for Nongshim in his rookie year. I think there could be a similar progression scale there. Rookie junglers just don't typically start off very hot in the LCK. Look at someone like Lucid in the spring split. He was really struggling until he found his footing, and then eventually it got a lot better for him. Players like Sylvie and Sponge, they're not as talented as Lucid, and so it takes them some time to get ready to play at this level. And then you got to go into Canyon, you got to go into Peanut, you got to go into these top tier junglers over and over again. It's a brutal business to be in, being an LCK jungler, but Sylvie's just not really up to the task. He was starting off this split and this year generally better than last split, but it's just kind of fallen off the rails at the end, and I think especially when they go into good teams, it's really exposed that he's just not the guy in the jungle position. Fisher also continues to just be completely nothing. I know he's shown more here in the LCK than he did in the LPL. I will definitely, say that, but I'm not impressed by him in the mid lane. I certainly wouldn't consider him a part of the long-term plans here for Nongshim. Jiwoo, continues to impress. Mihail actually had a pretty good series. Vital, I thought, was generally fine on the rel. I think there are positives to take away here for Nongshim, but Gen.G is obviously better in them. Steamrolling in this series, even without trying all that hard, is really not all that surprising. I just expect this to be them prepping mentally, at the very least, for their final series of the week instead. And then moving on now to day number 4, and we kick day 4 off with one of the more intriguing series on paper this week. It's KT Rolster taking on Dplus KIA, and DK is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. A big one for DK here, re-cementing that no, they are not just a team that's near the top of the standings that's gotten there because teams like T1 and KT are underperforming. No, they're actually good. Even when KT starts to get back into form, they're not good enough to be able to take down a team like Dplus KIA that is just a bit more consistent in the back half of these games. This is a big win for them. This guarantees them the number 3 seed. That's actually pretty major right now because dodging one of the top 5 teams is actually a pretty important thing to do in round number 1. You don't really want to have to face KT Rolster in a best of 5 if you can face someone like FearX instead. That's definitely a little bit of an easier challenge overall, but We should talk about this series in general, how we ended up getting there, and I know I've been critical about Kellen's benching here for DK, but if you ever wanted a series that justified the decision, this was probably it. Moham is going to get player of the series for me. This was a genuinely unbelievable performance from him. I know there are some concerns out there at every single good game that he's had so far has been on Rel, and I'm definitely acknowledging that. It definitely seems to be a bit of a pattern, but he wasn't really all that bad on the Alistair in game number 1, and if you're going to be a bit of an engage one trick, that's honestly kind of fine in the meta at the current moment, so long as you're able to actually play out laning phases on those melee champions in multiple different matchups. Good teams, if they identify that you can't really move off of things like Alistair or Rel, are going to pull out things like Karma and actually try to challenge you with Ezreal Karma early on in laning phases. I don't think that's going to happen too much in the LCK. They're not really the kind of region that actually takes advantage of things like that. I don't think Caitlyn is exactly the most common pick in the entire universe, but Moham is doing really well on these big engage threats. Honestly, watching him, he's actually very similar to a player I talked about in an earlier video that came out today in Labrav. I think it's very fun to watch the two play one after another in terms of watching those BDS games and now watching the DK games. I think their playstyles are very similar and they impact the games in very similar ways. I think Moham really is an interesting player. I just really like Kellen. I want to make it clear, Moham is certainly a lot more justifiable in this spot than someone like Bible was last split, who really just wasn't good enough to be in the LCK, certainly not playing over Kellen. Moham has at least shown some interesting things in his time and, the LCK in the past on teams like Kwangdong Freecs. He has shown some tape in the past that has made me interested in him as a player. I still don't think it's the right decision to have him in over Kellen. I think that might be a problem against actually really good teams. The top 3 or the top 2 teams in the LCK. I'm not quite sure they are going to fall quite as easily for the Moham tricks, but at least here it very much worked. Beryl was not on the same page as the rest of the team, and Moham was just completely outplaying him in this matchup, so that's good. Aiming had a hell of a split, man. I know it's not always brought up with him because he's such an interesting player to try to evaluate. He's really not super impactful on these games, and that feels like a weird thing to say because you look at the stats and this guy is first in damage per minute. He's first in damage percentage. I think he broke the LCK kill record by a country mile over the course of this split. I think he broke the LPL kill record by a country mile over the course of this split. His KDA looks amazing. His numbers look amazing. It's just really hard not to watch the tape and be yeah, this guy's really good later in the game. He doesn't really do a lot to get DK their leads, but when they do have these leads, he does a great job of taking advantage of them. I'm not trying to talk down to aiming, but it just makes him such a funny and interesting player to try to evaluate, because I think if you just looked at the numbers, you might call him the best player in the world. He would be an easy MVP pick, and he would be dominating every discussion about who is the most valuable player to their individual team. But again, as we've talked about this team for a majority of the year, he's the second or third player I bring up in every series. He's not even really the guy. Showmaker is the guy for DK in terms of the resources they're gathering. It's just a really interesting thing. I don't want it to be some sort of negative on aiming. I'm not trying to sit here and be oh, he's actually not consequential at all to DK's wins. That's certainly not what I'm trying to say. Obviously, when you're playing as well as aiming is, you're going to be consequential, and he is a big reason why this team has gotten more consistent over the course of this split as opposed to spring, but he's not what his numbers would indicate that he is. He's not the best player in the world right now. It's just a really fun and interesting dichotomy. He is kind of the maximized version of what we talk about with players like Teddy or players like Patrick over in the LEC, where we talk about a guy who does all the AD carry things really well, but doesn't exactly go entirely above and beyond. That's aiming, but it's not just the AD carry things that he does really well. It's the AD carry things that he does at a masterful level. He has mastered the basics and the the baseline general skills of being an AD carry to the point where he's just able to dominate when others are actually able to generate early on. So it's fun to watch this bot lane, and hopefully Moham can continue to grow if they are going to leave him in the lineup. Who knows? They put Kellen back in the playoffs last split. We'll see what they do here, but Showmaker continues to be good. Kingen was really funny in this series. Pulls out the Smolder top. Not really something I expected to see in the LCK. They're pretty adverse to things like this typically, but it's good to see. Lucid was solid here. He's always really good on tanks like Maokai. I think that's really kind of his specialty, but DK looking dangerous. They are looking like one of the scarier teams in the league. Going into the playoffs as the number 3 seed is certainly not something to scoff at. This is likely a team that will be moving on into the top 4, just with how seeding ends up going here, and they've earned it. And then for KT, ending 500 somehow feels entirely poetic for this roster. There have been a couple of other 500 teams, as a lot of people on social media have pointed out, over the past couple of years in the LCK. Last year it was T1, they won Worlds. 2 years ago it was DRX, they won Worlds. And so people are now oh, guess KT is gonna win Worlds. I do want to be clear, I was very high on both of those teams. You can go back. I tracked all of it on this channel. They're still up. Those videos are still up. I was the biggest DRX believer in 2022. That's kind of my calling card on this channel. If you haven't been around for a long time, that's kind of the thing that I got known for. And then last year, it was just like, I'm not giving up on T1, even though Faker's like not in the lineup. Like, I'm just not giving up on them, especially because Faker was coming back. KT is not one of those two teams. Their problems are a little bit more real, I think, than either of those teams ever were. They were inconsistent, but they had their highs, and this team definitely has their highs, but I just don't really trust them to get it out there regularly. I know Pioshik and Beryl and Deft, they're used to this 500 record. I just don't think it's going to go quite as well for them this time around. Deft is going to get dud of the series. He's gotten a lot of these over the course of this split. He's gotten a lot of player of the series, a lot of dud of the series. That stable, calming presence in the bot lane that he was for DRX in 2022, that is not the depth that we got here in 2024. He is the volatility. He is the chaos for KT, and it's really funny. His good series look really great, but then he'll get absolutely gapped by, like, Aiming and Moham, or, famously Leaper absolutely obliterated him both times that they played KDF. Like, it's just weird. He'll have these weird, bad games that are hard to predict. I don't think Beryl played well. I think Pioshik was also really bad in this series, and as we know, when Beryl and Pioshik play bad, there is a 0% chance that this team wins games regardless of who else is playing well. I think BDD and Perfect were actually pretty fine this series. Again, BDD's been really good for this team recently. It just hasn't really mattered. This team going into playoffs at 500 as the number 5 seed, they're taking on their arch rivals. We'll preview that at the end of the video, but I'm not entirely sure I have the same kind of confidence in KT as I did in some of the other teams that were sitting around 500 going into playoffs in the past. And then for DK, this is genuinely a good team. It's weird because I still have this reservation about them being able to compete with teams like Hanwha Life for that number 2 spot, but DK's biggest ambition right now is probably just to make the World Championships, and honestly, they're on a great path to do that. But then moving on now to our second series of day number 4, and we thought this one was going to matter quite a bit for playoff qualification, not so much with some of the upsets we got earlier on in the week. It's T1 taking on FearX, and T1 is going to get the job done, a 2-0 series win here. No actual playoff implications on the line here. T1 locked in to the number 4 seed, Fox locked into the number 6 seed. But still, I think both of these teams wanted to come out here and at least try to win, and that's, exactly what T1 did. They tried to win. Fox kind of got rolled over, and I think for the most part, I'm not entirely enthused about them going into playoffs, especially the way that I was the past couple of weeks. I think they got challenged by some actually good playoff teams this time around, and it didn't exactly go super well for them, but T1 starting to get some of that mojo back. This was a classic T1 series. This is them not really dropping any sort of, free gimmies for Fox to pick up throughout the series. This is them having that global taunt on Faker in the middle of the map, and this is them being able to play through playmaking down from the bottom of the map through KIA, who's going to get my player of the series here. I mean, he's got a Bard skin for a reason. This guy is an absolute freaking menace on this champion. I mean, he goes 0-0 and 22 in game number 2. It's one of the best Bard performances I've seen all year long. Truly exceptional stuff. This is kind of a signature pick for him individually as a player, and so to see him pull it out here and really succeed on it, it's not shocking. KIA has been very, very solid over the back half of this split. It's not always been perfect. Honestly, the stretches where T1 was bad, KIA was also kind of bad for this team, and so I'm not going to sit here and try and sell you on this idea that KIA has actually been super good all split long, and that all of this talk about T1 being in a bad spot and KIA underperforming, that none of that is real, because some of it is real. Like, there is real concern that KIA has not been consistent really at all throughout this split and throughout this year, but when you get performances like this, you have to just imagine that when it matters the most, it's going to continue to happen, that he's going to be able to continue to step up and be productive for this team. Gumayushi continues to be great for them, obviously, but it wasn't so much about him. I think Zeus is the other player to really shout out here for T1. The Camille in game 2, the Kennen in game 1, both excellent. I thought the Kennen engages were phenomenal in that first game, and obviously Camille is a very dangerous champion in the hands of someone as mechanically talented as Zeus is for this team. I thought Owner was really good here on the Viego and on the Lilia. Viego is kind of a signature champion for Owner, and so, again, not surprising to see him come out and just kind of destroy Raptor on it, who had kind of a terrible week, all things considered, but for T1, this is just the kind of win you wanted to get. This is the kind of win that you kind of needed going into the playoffs. You wanted to be able to stabilize. You wanted to show that you could go 4-0 in a week, and obviously it didn't quite happen that way. They went 4-1, but I think they'll take it. I think they will take 11-7 as a record, especially with all the inconsistency they had had this year. And then for FearX on the other side, they've kind of failed their way into the playoffs here at 8-10. Obviously, I'm not super enthused about this team in comparison to basically every other playoff team, but in comparison to the non-playoff teams like the Kwangdong Freecs, whose spot they essentially took, I still feel pretty okay about them, even with a loss like this where they kind of got trounced. Dud of the series is going to go to Duro in the support position. I'm like the biggest Duro fan in the world. I'm certainly not going to sit here and say, oh, you know, this is indicative that he's not good enough to play at a top level. This guy is very new to the LCK. I'm not going to sit here and try and expect him to go toe-to-toe with a KIA who's clearly very in form, or at least motivated to try and be in form at the current moment, and say that he should have absolutely beaten him and really taken him to task. Like, obviously, I didn't expect that to happen, but he was someone that I was really talking about like one of the more consistent supports in the LCK over the past couple of weeks, and that did not show up, not only this series, but this week at all. Both him and Hanwha, who had been on the up, definitely on an upward trajectory, they did not continue that over the course of this week number 9. Raptor, I think, also had a really bad week. You know, Raptor's a player I've defended. I think he's basically like 90 to 95% of what you were getting out of Willer previously on this team. People are still very upset that Willer is not starting for FearX, but Raptor and Willer, very similar players in terms of playstyle, and I really don't think Raptor is that much worse. Even if he is maybe marginally a little bit worse, I think it's totally fine to have Raptor in the lineup here for FearX, and it's just unfortunate that it didn't end up working out for them this week. Owner got, you know, really fed in these games and just completely outplayed him. You know, Closer historically plays really well into Faker. Faker actually historically plays really bad into former T1 products. I've talked about this on the channel. Basically, anybody who has scrimmed in the system with him kind of knows how to beat Faker. It's very weird how that works here in the LCK, but not enough to be able to tilt the series in their favor, and Clear was just kind of along for the ride. T1 definitely better here. FearX definitely has some searching to do in order to try and convince themselves they could win a playoff series or even really a playoff game, but the fact that they are in it in the first place is huge because the other teams had already made it in the spring split. They're going to be qualifying for the regional qualifiers anyways, regardless of what happens in the playoffs. They're going to be very excited about that, but T1 has a real shot to be able to get back on track and back on board here. This team obviously going into the playoffs as the number 4 seed is not ideal for them. It means they have a harder opponent in round number 1, but if they can get through that, double elimination starts, and I think there is a real opportunity for this team to go on yet another run, and we could potentially be seeing a very familiar finals if everything goes right. But then moving on now to our 5th and final day of action here in the LCK in week number 9, and we kick off day 5 with a battle of the bottom teams. It's Nongshim RedForce taking on OK BRION. And Nongshim is going to pick up the 2-0 series win here. They're going to move to 5-13 to end the split. It could be worse for this team. Absolutely, it could be worse. But at the end of the day, we are walking away with kind of an okay split, all things considered, for Nongshim. I thought that they were going to be the worst team outside of Bro in the LCK. And so for them to be relevant in any capacity, I think is a positive. I think that there are some interesting takeaways from this series, especially with the fallout from this series. But for Bro, yeah, this is the Bro ending. They have 2 series wins this year. Both of them are massive upsets, and they've lost all 16 of their other series this split. It's basically everything you would expect from Bro. This is just how they live. They're going to beat KT, and they're going to get destroyed by everybody else. It's just kind of, you know, the way that it goes when it comes to BRION. I think this team is, you know, fun organizationally, but trust me, my disdain for their roster decisions and just the general way that this org is run in terms of the On The Rift product, it's not going away. It's certainly not something that I have wavered on at all. I was super critical of them in the offseason. I honestly got some pushback for just how rude I was to their offseason. Unfortunately, it very much came true. They were by far the worst team in the LCK this year. Let's talk about Nongshim first. Player of the series is going to go to Fisher, and the reason this is interesting, it's not just like, oh, Fisher continues to be actually a lot better here in the LCK than he was in the LPL. I'm not saying that he's been good, but he's certainly been a lot better because he was a disaster in the LPL, and all you really need him to do is be, like, competent. You need him to show that he can perform at least a little bit at this level, but the reason this is interesting is because, like, a day after this series, they extended Fisher through 2026. They said, like, yeah, we're locking you in. You're the mid laner of the future for us, and that is certainly a very interesting decision for Nongshim. I certainly have not seen enough from Fisher to feel good about him moving into 2025, let alone through 2026. That feels like a pretty crazy decision for them to make, especially when they have someone like Calyx down in the Challengers League that a lot of people are really excited about. You know, it's hard to get excited about Nongshim mid lane products because Fiesta and Quad and, you know, Call Me, they've all flopped at the LCK level, and so it's hard to get excited about a Nongshim mid lane prospect just with the track record of them, but, you know, to kind of stunt his development and say, no, Fisher's our guy. At least we assume that's what that means with them extending his contract. It's certainly an interesting decision, and he may have played his way into it with this Neferi game in game number 1. This might be the first Neferi in pro. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm certain it's been played in a minor region. Like, that I'm not worried about. But, like, of the regions I cover, I don't think I've ever covered a Neferi game on the channel before. And so, definitely interesting to talk about. It was very fun to watch. Fisher played the champion very well. Clearly, he's pretty practiced on Neferi, and I wouldn't mind seeing more of it. I just didn't expect to see it in the final week of the LCK. That certainly wasn't something on my prep board. But the Corki was also pretty good in game number 2. I do think it's worth giving a big shout out to Mihail for that second game on the Gnar. A couple of massive engages that end up really closing that game out around 30 minutes. It's really nice to see Mihail actually kind of grow into this role as a good top laner for them. I said that it was the right move to move on from Din Din and to go to someone like Mihail later on in the split, because Din Din just wasn't really doing anything for me. Mihail, while he's certainly not been perfect, he definitely struggled to get adjusted to that role when he first got put into the LCK. I think he has grown into being kind of an okay top laner for this team, and that's certainly better than a lot of the other worst teams in the league have. I think Sylvie was fine here. Couple of pretty good games from him, even if he didn't stop Youngjae from actually being good on the other side. And I continue to be very high, not only on Jiwoo like everybody else, but on Vital as a support player. I think especially for somebody who has not been playing the role all that long, he's doing pretty well in it. He's really not like taking to it slow. I think he has pretty good instincts for playing support. I'd love to see them move forward with him more going into next year, because I just think that there actually is something here with him as a potential good support moving forward. But for Nongshim, you're just excited to be able to end the year on a good note. You were so pessimistic, I think, for a majority of this year. You invested a lot into your youth, and you probably wanted to go for a lower budget roster, and it very much did not work out. We'll see what they end up doing next year. I doubt that they're going to go all in and all of a sudden buy some players like they did in 2022, because it went so wrong for them that year, but who knows? You never know what happens in the LCK. And then for Bro, just a disaster. Like, I think the organizational decisions have been a mess for this team. I think they constantly get the absolute worst out of all of their players. They can't really decide on who they want to start in any particular circumstances, and it feels like everybody who leaves this team instantly gets better for just not being on the team. Players like Delight and Henna, it feels like they've leveled up ever since leaving Bro. I don't really know what to say about the org. I think they're a bit of a disaster class in the LCK right now. Polu is going to get done of the series. I've seen basically nothing from Polu over the course of this split to lead me to believe that he can even be a playable LCK support at any level. You know, not that he was much worse than someone like Effort, who was in this spot before him, but the fact that Effort was here in the first place was already such a disaster for them. You know, Nongshim knows that one very clearly, but, you know, Samver, Envy, it didn't matter who was playing AD carry. It was absolute disaster for them as well. Kind of similar to KDF. They just couldn't find anybody in the bot lane to even be remotely competent at the LCK level. You know, Fate came in and was an upgrade. I think Youngjae, an interesting addition. Morgan was super aggressive on the Camille in game number 2, but none of it really matters at the end of the day, because Bro just doesn't have a chance of being able to win games. They don't know how to play the macro game, and it's not like they're already good in like the mechanic area and they just can't close. They're just not a very good League of Legends team, and 2-16 I think fits them rather well. If it's not clear, I'm really just not a huge fan of this organization, and we'll see what they do going into next year, but I don't really have high hopes. And then for Nongshim, you know, again, like I said, we'll see what happens with this roster. Fisher seems to be sticking around. We'll see if Jiwoo can be poached by a better team. That's kind of the hope here, but if they're able to build around him, and maybe Fisher actually is good, maybe they have something here, but we've been saying that for a while. When it comes to Nongshim and their young players, it's just never really developed for them, and, you know, I'm really not sure that next year is going to be that year either. But that's going to bring us to our final series of the week and our final series of the regular season here in the LCK, and it is a good one. We are wrapping up with a potential finals preview here, as we saw Hanwha Life Esports taking on Gen.G. And Gen.G is going to pick up the 2-0 series win. It honestly wasn't really even that close. Usually in the LCK, these series that are pretty back and forth, that are between two good teams, like, we see some real good games out of it. We typically don't see blowouts in these high-profile, really hyped-up series, but unfortunately, that just wasn't the case here. Gen.G just straight up better than Hanwha Life, and quite frankly, they've been better than everybody that they've played against across this entire year, whether it's been here in the LCK or internationally, you know, excluding the Esports World Cup, which I don't think a lot of people are really reading too much into. Gen.G has just been the best team in the world, and it's not been particularly close. This is what happens when Gen.G takes a team seriously. They come out and they absolutely destroy one of the other best teams in the world, and so really impressive stuff from them. For Hanwha Life, obviously there is at least some things to be concerned about here, but honestly, like, can you even really sit here and be like, well, we played horrible? Like, I think one or two players could have been better for sure. A couple of positioning mistakes in key moments from some key players on HLE, but like, this performance isn't like god awful. It's just Gen.G is so good that you can't make any minor errors and still be able to survive if they're actually trying against you, and I think that's becoming clearer and clearer for teams running into them. Player of the series is going to go to Chovy in the mid lane. He's still the best player in the world. Don't forget about him just because Pays and Canyon and Keen are all popping off. You know, and Lahens, I'm not trying to discount him. Like, everybody's popping off on Gen.G, and I think some of the spotlight is being taken away from Chovy. That's fine for Chovy, but let's not forget that he is still the best player in the entire world, that he dominated Spring for a reason, that he's been really clutch for this team in pretty pivotal moments, and that he is really someone that you can trust to win any game against any opponent. This Tristana is unplayable against. Like, there is literally nothing you can do. He has figured out how to maximize Tristana as a champion. He Tristana W buffered Poppy Stun. I didn't think that was possible. Like, truly, like, if you would have asked me before this game, is that even possible to do? I'm like, no human could ever do that. It's basically, you would have to be near perfect in order to get that done, and Chovy makes it look like a walk in the park. Like, genuinely, he's teaching me things about the game that I didn't think were possible. I've been playing for over a decade. Like, it's just ridiculous. Chovy is insane. The mechanics that he's able to pull off are insane. He's so fun to watch. He's so aggressive on this champion. He's ready to fight 24/7, and it's awesome, man. Gen.G is awesome, and a lot of that is because of Chovy. I do want to give a shout out to his jungler, though. Canyon had a great series here. You know, he's an MVP frontrunner for a reason. I think a lot of people are going to give him MVP votes. I'm certainly going to be one of them, but the Nidalee, the Lilia, looked super good here. Peanut was doing some interesting things on the other side of this. Peanut has been the second best jungler in the LCK over the course of this year, but, I mean, second best isn't Canyon. Like, unfortunately, that's just how it goes. Pays continued to look great. When you're doing 1 billion damage on Ziggs, you know you're doing something right. Lahens was great. Keen was definitely the better top laner here, especially on the Nasus in game number 1, something I really didn't think I was going to say in a series like this. It's just crazy. Gen.G almost feels like they're still limit testing at times, but they end the regular season 17-1, 35-3 in terms of game score. And remember, 2 of those losses came in one series against KT Rolster. In their 17 wins, they've had 1 game loss. It's absolutely absurd. Like, it is truly unfathomable just how good they have been in the regular season. If they do anything other than obliterate the playoffs, that's entirely on them. And then for Hanwha Life on the other side, you know, this team is good. I'm not going to try to talk them down, but like, it's just so frustrating to feel like, yeah, we're clearly the second best team in the LCK right now, and yet we still don't have a chance of even competing with number 1 because of just how good they are. I mean, Doran got obliterated here. He's going to get done of the series again. The top lane triangle of the big 3 ends up continuing here with Doran beating Zeus. Zeus not really beating Keen, but, you know, before it was Zeus beats Keen and Keen beats Doran. At least the Keen beats Doran part is still active of that. You know, Doran's still beating Zeus, so it's time for Zeus to do his part and step up. Jokes aside, Doran was awful. Like, truly horrendous. I mean, the Kennen, what was this game? Like, Kennen looks awful in the LCK right now. It looks pretty good in a lot of the other regions. I've seen people complaining about it on Reddit, as Reddit is one to do, about it being a really bad champion. It's been pretty effective basically everywhere except the LCK. Don't really know why it's not working so much here, but you know, certainly something to monitor. Peanut and Zeka were certainly the 2 players I thought were trying the most on the side of HLE. Peanut was doing things on Ivern, but only so much you can do on that champion, and Zeka was at least trying to not give free gold over to Gen.G at every given opportunity, even if he was pretty far behind Chovy. He's playing Corki into Tristana. It's hard to win that 1v1 when you're playing against Chovy in a winning matchup. It's just not an easy thing to do. You know, Viper was way too aggressive, got caught out on the lack of mobility champions like Ashe multiple times before he really needed to. Delight, you know, was outplayed in a lot of circumstances by his former teammates. Like, HLE is good, but they're not good enough to be able to take down Gen.G, and that's unfortunately the curse that they have to bear right now. Gen.G is just the top of the mountain, and nobody seems to be able to climb it right now. It is truly unbelievable how crazy they are playing, and if they don't win the LCK, if they don't win Worlds, I think they're going to consider 2024 a disappointment. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LCK week number 9 overview and analysis video. The final regular season week of the summer split is done and dusted. Up on the screen, the playoff bracket for the summer split playoffs. Obviously, we're not going to go over it in too much detail in today's video because we are going to be going over it tomorrow in the big primer video that we're going to put out alongside my award picks. That's MVP, Rookie of the Split, all 3 of my All-Pro teams. We're going to preview every playoff team. We're going to do a full mock bracket. All of that stuff will be in tomorrow's video, but I did want to at least show you guys what the bracket looks like. We get the telecom war in round number 1, T1 taking on KT. We get DK taking on Fox. Certainly some interesting matchups, of course, selection for Gen.G in the second round because they get that bye alongside HLE despite their loss to Gen.G at the end of the regular season. So definitely an intriguing first round. I think that telecom war is the matchup everyone's going to be looking at, but moving into my player of the week and my dud of the week for week 9, the final week of the season, my final player of the week is going to go to KIA, the support for T1. T1 was awesome this week. They looked just about as good as they possibly could going into the playoffs after looking very shaky the last few weeks. This bot lane has been keeping T1 alive in a lot of these games, and KIA, I think, has been a part of that. Guma has definitely been the one I've been pointing out a lot more on the channel, but KIA definitely deserves his flowers. That Bard game was truly tremendous, and it's a big reason why he got this player of the week. My honorable mentions, my runner-ups, Chovy, the mid laner for Gen.G. Do I even really need to explain it? This guy just dominates every single game that he plays, regardless of whether or not he's trying as hard as possible. 4 games of Tristana this week, and he obliterated all of them. And then Showmaker, the mid lane for Dplus KIA. He was kind of the driving force for DK for a majority of their games, not all of them, but quite a few of them. Over the course of this week, I, of course, considered both Aiming and Moham as the bot lane for DK as well in this spot, but I thought Showmaker was just slightly more influential for DK. So Showmaker, Chovy, going to be my honorable mentions, and KIA is going to get my player of the week. And then my dud of the week is going to go to Polu, the support for Bro. Just not a good week for him. I honestly considered someone like Duro, the support for FearX, in this spot because he didn't play particularly well this week either, but Polu was worse, and I would really only be giving it to Duro to not rag on Polu more than I already have over the past couple of weeks. This guy has just not been an LCK caliber support really at all in 2024, and somehow replacing Effort, who was already horrible for Bro, has somehow been a downgrade for the organization. They just keep not being able to find an answer in some of these key areas, and so Polu's going to get dud of the week, and KIA is going to get my player of the week. But that's gonna do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LCK, we post about all 4 of the major regions, LCS, LEC, and LPL, as well as the NACL Tier 2 over in North America. So if you're interested in that, as well as the LCK primer video that's gonna be coming out tomorrow, hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.